On the Way Home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Hi, my name is Leah Dunbach, and for the past 8 years, I have been photographing and recording the stories of people experiencing homelessness with the two goals of humanizing people experiencing homelessness and shining a spotlight on their plight. I also have a book series called Nowhere to Go Home, Photographs and Stories of People Experiencing Homelessness. I was inspired to begin doing this work by my mother, Sarah, who was homeless herself and rescued by Mother Teresa. I will be doing a project in collaboration with my mother this coming Saturday from 1 to 3 at the Richmond Hill United Church, where we will both be speaking, me virtually from Zoom and her in person, and she'll be selling both of our books and some of my work. I hope to see you there. All the profits from this event will be donated to the social justice programs at the Richmond Hill United Church.
Welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door, where I have the great pleasure of working with some amazing folks, about 100 of them that are doing great work around housing, connecting people to housing, to health, to meaningful employment in York Region, in Peel Region, and in Durham Region, and hopefully soon to be across the country with our awesome Construct program of social enterprise that launches people into the trades that coincidentally builds the 3 million homes. Well, then there'll be people that build the 3 million homes that we need to house people across this great country. We do not do this podcast alone. We do it with our good friends at the Canadian Alliance and Homelessness. They are doing great work. You should check out all they're doing at caeh.com. And they have all sorts of different programs for you to take a look at. One of them is, of course, Built for Zero. You want to become a Built for Zero community, so check them out. And get the good folks from CAH into your community. I'm not doing justice to all the great things that they're doing. So check out their website. You can check us out at bluedoor.ca. Listen, I was just thinking yesterday when we talked about On the Way Home, it is December in Ontario for us. So, man, weather is crazy. And so I was driving through a storm yesterday on my way home, and this podcast got me there because a 30-minute drive turned into an hour and a half. And thankfully, I can listen to the wonderful people we have on this podcast week to week. And listen, this week's guest is no exception. He is a return guest. I'm going to have him back every year because he's doing wonderful work. I have with me today Scott MacAfee. And Scott is a student. I think we all know this school. It's the School of Life. So he's a student of life, seeking out the new, innovative, and interesting, and then connecting them to each other and existing systems. He lives and works from a strength-based approach where all people have something to contribute. We're going to talk about his work today. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here again.
Yes, listen, you were the only person. We've had people on twice before, but you're actually twice in the same calendar year because we did this I think early in 2022 this year, sorry.
Yeah.
So welcome back. You're going to get a second shot at the same question we ask everyone. I wonder if your answer will be similar but different, if there's any growth there. And that is, of course, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that question a lot. And I remember my last answer was was long and drawn out. And so I thought I would go something a little shorter today. And I think home is where you find love. And I heard that in a song, and it really struck home, pun intended. And I think that's rings pretty true for me. So where you feel love, you feel valued, you feel secure, all those good things. But yeah, that's where it is, where you find love. I think that's your home.
Well, you know what? This is the last podcast we are going to record in 2022. It will most likely play in early of 2023, but I think that is the answer of the year. I love how it's succinct and it's so true. Jesse Thistle actually he did a T-shirt for Fred Victor in Toronto, and the slogan was "Home is Love." So I think it's along similar lines, and that's absolutely the truth. So well
Awesome.
said. Well
Thanks.
said. You're in good company. So let's talk about the National Advisory Council on Poverty. Who are they? What is their mandate? If people don't know, let's tell them.
Yeah, sure. So the National Advisory Council on Poverty was founded in 2019 as part of the Opportunity for All, Canada's first official poverty strategy, as a body that with three mandates: to provide independent advice to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Next is to write a report annually on the progress towards the 2030 goal of reducing poverty in Canada by half. And the third piece is to have an ongoing conversation with Canadians about poverty. The council is made up of 9 people. We use the conversation we have annually with people about poverty to inform our first 2 mandates. So the more we know, the better advice we can give, and the more we can fill out our report.
And let's talk about part of that mandate. First of all, what is your role on that council? We didn't put that in your introduction.
So. Yeah, no worries. So I'm the chair. So I'm a full-time member. So my role is to convene the council, help support the conversations. We also have a secretariat support out of Employment and Social Development Canada, and they do great work. Their team with Lisa Bacon is the manager, and she has a great team behind her, and they support the council in all our efforts. So my role is it's an interesting role because we have such interesting folks on the council. So there's 9 people from coast to coast who are experts in the field, nonprofit leaders and doctors and psychiatrists and leaders of different organizations. Wear many hats, but we've all managed to come together under this common idea that we can end poverty in Canada. So that's our goal.
And what's the process around people? Like, how did you select those 9 individuals? Sounds like a really great, talented group of individuals. But how did that come to be?
So in 2019, there was a call for interest, and that went out from the Employment Social Development Canada, and then people applied. So it was, and there's 3 different kind of roads. You can apply as a general member. You can apply as a chair. 4 now. You can apply as a person with lived experience. And we've changed that role on the council. It's now a person with lived expertise. We see experience as something you have, and as soon as you're able to share it, it becomes expertise. And there's also a role for a person with particular responsibilities for children and youth, and that's filled by my esteemed colleague Sylvie Veilla out of Quebec.
Very cool. And now you've been in this role for 2 years?
2019, so 3 years now.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah. So my term goes to 24, and we'll see what we can get done by then.
Very cool. Yeah. And so you start this role. About a year into this role, we're hit with a pandemic that drastically changes. It's a game changer, of course.
Yeah.
How was that for you? You're a year in, and this happens.
Well,
yeah, I guess. Huh?
We were only maybe it was like we started in September, and then we were in Regina having supper when the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. So that was March 12th. On March 13th, we had meetings in Winnipeg. Ending the second week of our engagement, we had 4 more weeks of engagement planned over the next month. But we all packed up and went home. We went to Winnipeg first. I had a great day of meetings in Winnipeg. It was really odd because people were hadn't figured out the fist bumps or the elbow bumps, or 6 feet, didn't know what that was yet, and the masks weren't available. Hand sanitizer was really being slathered on quite generously. but there wasn't that many cases at the time too. So it was really interesting and a weird kind of time to be in the airports and traveling. And one of my Sylvie actually had got something stuck in her throat and started coughing, and then but we saw like people grabbing their kids and then pulling them away from her because she was coughing in public. So it was it was interesting time to be out and about.
The early days, I can recall, it's such a Canadian thing too, when they're saying, well, you need about 6 feet. People are like, well, how do we measure it? And of course, what did Canadians do? It was the hockey stick.
Thing. Right. Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. Or I think the one of the ones I saw was like 60 Timbits. I thought that was very Canadian. Like, that was very Canadian too.
Yeah, it is. But I just, there's no way I'd ever weigh 60 Timbits like that. It would break my heart. For sure. Let's talk about the annual report. So annually, you do a report. We had you on last year to talk about it. That's very important. It kind of is a measuring stick of where we're at, right?
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about it? What's all involved?
Yeah. So this year's report is really based in the 2020 calendar year. So it will be the first year of the pandemic. In the past, we had done in 2020, we did our engagements face to face. So we talked about 200 people. In 21, we talked to about 600 people, all virtual. In 22, so we did the engagements. We did all pretty much in the winter of 22, and we had 7 sessions. The first year we talked to individuals. The second year we talked to groups based on theme. So in housing or homelessness or food security or mental health or employment, training, different themes. So we had really a lot of experts on the theme in one space talking about one thing. This year we went to a different model where we wanted to have people talking across. So we did some overarching and cross-cutting conversations, and we set up 7 of those. And we had people register, and we had kind of cut off at 300 per conversation. So we had 7 conversations, 300 per, and we had about 1,000 unique individuals show up to those conversations. I think the most we had was 230, and the least we had was 170. So they're pretty well attended. They're facilitated conversations. We did conversations on the future of work, from communities for communities, the poverty trap, chronic and transient poverty, transitions in and out of support systems, the future of health and poverty, future-proofing our social safety net, and the climate change and poverty. And so we had a lot of interest in those sessions, and we even had a waiting list that we ended up kind of opening up after the second conversation, where we saw people were registering and not always showing up. But it was a great conversation. From there, we took the things that really stood out, which were access, adequacy, and kind of discrimination/racism. And then we went to small groups and had those deeper conversations. So with people that were living those experiences, having challenges with the adequacy of benefits or supports, the access to benefits and supports, and suffering from different forms of discrimination and racism, persons with disability, different racialized populations.
Wow, like very, very complex. Now, can I ask you something too? When 2019, when you were going to do your first report,
yeah,
what we're doing right now, like this kind of Zoom thing, was not a thing. Like that would have been done more in person. The plan.
Yeah. Oh, so it was all in person. So, yeah, you're right. Zoom existed, but it hadn't been popularized. It wasn't accessible. It wasn't widely available. People didn't have cameras. People didn't have microphones. There was lots of things that was different. So in 2019, we were actually going to where people are and talking to them about what supports. And the question we had in 2019 or in like spring 2020 was, what does poverty mean to you? It's very similar to what does home mean to you? But it was a question that we took a long time about to develop, because it's something you can lean into, lean away from. You can give a real clinical answer, you can give a real personal answer. But what we found was that poverty is the individual experience of a systemic inequity. So there's some system that's creating inequity, and you're experiencing it in your own way. We also learned through the process that communities also experience that. So different marginalized communities can experience that. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities experience poverty differently. Immigrants, refugees, racialized populations, Black populations, 2S LGBTQ people have a different experience of poverty. People with disabilities, different experience. Homelessness, different experience. Children, youth, and care came up a lot, different experience. People living in and out of institutions, different experience. Criminal justice system, women, rural, remote, like everyone has a different experience of poverty, but they're all called poverty. And different systems exert different pressures on those individuals or populations. But poverty is not a simple thing. It's kind of all the things together in a really mean way.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, and you can't, I think too often in society, we try and take a title and make it fit with everyone. And it's just different, how you said. Now, it's interesting what I think, like sometimes there's so many terrible things that occurred during the pandemic. But I mean, sometimes when we look at the silver linings, and one of the silver linings I thought was, hey, with political will at dollars, man, did we house a ton of people fast and take care of our people, showing it can be done. The other thing too, I think for your, like the access now, when you're doing this report, when you talked about the number of people that you surveyed and talked to and you had lists and everything like that, easier, more to access, right now, like you could, it's a call, like it's this kind of video call, right?
Yeah. And I think that the only challenge is you're accessing different people. So if you have the video technology, if you have data, you're talking to people that have. So a lot of people that we need to talk to don't have. We hear lots of stories about parents and moms, filling up their car with their kids and going to outside of McDonald's or a Starbucks and then using their Wi-Fi for the day on multiple devices with all the kids in the car because they didn't have any access to any Wi-Fi at home or any digital access at home. So we heard there's positives and negatives to it, and you can. I found that when you're talking to somebody face to face, it's different. You can kind of you feel it more if you're talking to them. I think video is great, but if you're talking to them in the same space and you're close enough to kind of reach out and touch them, then it's a different experience.
I agreed. I've had a few conversations with people. Part of my job is going out and speaking, advocacy, that kind of stuff. And when you're doing it like this, I find it's hard to gauge reaction. Should I pivot? Am I hitting it? I can't really tell if humor's hitting. I can't, people with their cameras on. Yeah. So you're right. In person is just different. You really feel the energy or what's happening for sure. But yeah, it is different now that even like you said in 2019, Zoom, yeah, it existed. And if you had shares in it, you probably weren't making money. And then after the pandemic now, almost we do this too much. But it is convenient. It saves people, I think, kind of time and travel and that kind of thing. Let's talk year to year. So let's talk about the report. You talked about the process. Unbelievable how you and the team pull this together. It's with all the work that's put into it. And I'm excited. What are the highlights from the report this year? And second part to that question is, what are the big differences from the previous year?
So some highlights for me are we really started to, I guess the highlights and the differences is really started to get into the issue a bit more. The first year we talked about the experience of poverty and we were really kind of learning about, individuals' experience of poverty. The second year we started to get into what can we do in different themes. And then I think the recommendations are very complementary over time. This year we really kind of figured that there were some areas that we of things that we had already said. And we just needed to kind of really push on some more. So things like, how do we access things? How do we provide equity? How do we talk about dignity in service provision? How do we make sure that the children and youth are protected against intergenerational poverty? How can we recommit to a way of doing things that is fully encompassing and with and by people as opposed to having it done to and for people? So those are kind of some big pieces. And our recommendations, I think, matured. I think if I can say that, I think we really re-emphasize the idea that we need to urgently implement the calls to action, the calls for justice from the Truth and Reconciliation and Reclaiming Power reports for Indigenous Canadians. We talked about establishing an income floor this year for the first time, made up of employment income, provincial and federal supports, municipal as well, and other targeted supports, or a combination of all three. So my dad used to say, you can tell me what to do or how to do it, but not both. So we recommended that there's an income floor be set up. The next piece we talked about making the poverty targets equitable. So without equity, there can be no equality. And so there's a bunch of groups, as I mentioned earlier, that have poverty at a greater rate. So and the report referred to them as the most marginalized or made most marginal. So it wasn't something that they did, but it's something that's happened to them. And so we asked that our poverty goals be set at a 50% reduction for all the groups, all those groups that have been made most marginal. We also talked about early intervention. So identify early children and youth that are at risk of intergenerational poverty, and put the benefits and programs in place so that doesn't happen, because it's easier to prevent than it is to solve in the end. We talked about developing a national commissioner for children and youth so that we'd have some sort of say on a national level. The provincial jurisdictions have different responsibilities and different ideas about it. And lastly, we thought that we need to increase awareness, access to, and availability of government benefits and supports. One of the biggest ways would be through auto filing and auto enrollment to programs. So if you're eligible for something federally, then you should be able to get it because all your tax slips are already sent in to the federal government. And so if they could do that tax filing for you, then they could actually enroll you in the programs you're eligible for and send you that financing. And those are our 5 recommendations, but I think they're more mature, and I think we're getting deeper and deeper into the policy, which is where the magic is.
Have you seen so year to year, I know it's not apples to apples, right? Which is, I think, what people need to understand about it's not the same report year after year after year, right? You're maturing, as you say, changing. Some parts of the conversation change because poverty is kind of moving, right? But are there things that we looked at this year that we said there's some improvement, or that we were able to see we're moving the needle on things?
Oh, for sure. So what we saw in 2020 was, it might be kind of anomaly, because in 2020 we also experienced CERB as a country, and the pandemic brought with it pandemic benefits for individuals, and for individuals who had made $5,000, and for businesses. So that moved a lot of people that were kind of just below poverty to above the poverty line. So poverty rate in Canada actually dropped to 6.4%. So that was, pretty outstanding, the lowest number in history. So we did that, or with the benefits from the CERB and the federal benefits, did a lot of that work for us, heavy lifting. And so we saw what can happen if we invest in people. There was groups that were left out. So the people that were on social assistance in many provinces didn't access, or weren't able to access, or it was clawed back from different provinces. And groups that aren't in the traditional income systems, homeless folks, they weren't really funded in the same way as others were. But that 6.4% of Canadians still living in poverty, that means that there's 2.357 thousand people. So 2,357,000 people are still living in poverty, even though we're at our lowest point ever with poverty numbers. And that's made up of 802 racialized individuals, 761,000 people with disabilities, 619 single men, and 207,000 single moms. So it's good news, but it's not enough yet. And so we're still working on it, and hopefully we can do better. Unmet housing needs dropped, poverty dropped, food insecurity went the other way. So I think we have a couple more conversations and really get our teeth into why, pun intended, into why food insecurity is going the wrong direction while poverty is going down.
Yeah, and we talked about, it's funny, just recently we had Neil Hetherington from Daily Bread on, and he was saying, yeah, I mean, the numbers we discussed their report, who's hungry, and he was, I think it doubled or tripled. They saw their the food banks usage, and he's
Right.
saying, look, I mean, the answer is not more food banks. It's almost to what you were speaking of there. It's that income floor, right? That if people have the income to afford housing, they can afford groceries, right? But there isn't
Right.
a say housing bank that you can go to if you're short that month. There's a food bank, so they pay for housing, and the numbers were crazy. He was saying that, I think, and they dropped a bit, if families using or individuals using the food bank after pay for housing is at $8 left over at the end of the month, and if you're Black and Indigenous or person of color, you would have $6 after paying for housing. $6, just unbelievable. And we know that in Ontario, even I think it's 15% of Ontario residents receive Ontario Works, so social assistance or disability, ODSP, which are levels of, I think, 733, and ODSP is just about 1,200. So there's a huge gap there. With the reports, when you talk about income, I mean, I got to think in food insecurity, the evidence has never been clearer. And you just showed when you do CERB, and I think that's what you're trying to link to, the drop, right? The reduction in a lot of this is really around that income floor. Is it not? Would you agree? If we're going to continue to decrease poverty, that would be where to put our efforts, or one of the places for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's a complex triangle, right? I think there's the food insecurity that you see, and you talk about the food banks getting more kind of popular, and the income floor, more income. The challenge with more income is higher rents. So if we can figure out how to like maintain the rent and maintain food prices and then provide more income, then yes, because the market basket measure works on there's two levers. There's the income side and there's the market basket side. So the market basket, if it stays flat, so it doesn't increase in price,
right.
And you increase the income, poverty goes down. If you maintain the income and decrease the price of goods and services and housing and food and transportation, then poverty goes down. If you increase the income and increase the price, poverty stays the same. But food insecurity goes up. And then I think you nailed it on the head. There's no housing bank. Well, some places there's probably a housing bank, but land bank. But if you have to choose between like where you're gonna save, you always save on food, because your housing's non-negotiable. Like your rent is your rent, or your mortgage is your mortgage. You have to pay that, and when you pay that, then you get to decide what you're gonna do with the rest of the money. If there's $6 or $8 left, then you buy food. If you don't have enough money to buy food or enough food to buy, then you go out and find someone that can help you out, and that's where a lot of the support comes in. It comes in food. So I think having a food security conversation without housing involved, maybe just shooting ourselves in the foot. Because if the answer is going to be that we need more affordable housing, and then they change this, and then the story gets, we need more affordable housing. Okay, well, do we need more affordable housing stock, or do we need more of affordable housing? And so I think that that conversation is also interesting. I've seen some articles recently kind of splitting that division of argument into, like, we need more affordable housing, not just more housing.
Yeah, well, because recently, and we could talk for a long time about this. It's been a supply, and not the conversation of, hey, what kind of supply are we talking about? Because I'm not hearing affordable. Then it's like, so define affordable. Right. If you look at what CMHC is, 80% of mid-market rent, which is not affordable to most people still, because rents have gone up. We're talking about rent geared to income, like deeply affordable.
Yeah, deeply affordable.
And we should say, even with that 733 that social assistance recipients would get, they don't actually, if you don't have housing attached to that, it's split, because there's a housing allowance and then kind of a living allowance. And so people in shelters would not get that housing allowance. So they're at about $300 per month, trying to get out of that and get it out. Like this is, there's a lot of work to do what you're saying. And Scott, I'll tell you this too. I think I know and I don't know. So I go and talk to the people who do know on my team on the front lines. It's like, oh, this must be. And I said, what do you see now? What is the difference from a year ago? And they say, Mike, there's more people working full time living in shelters right now, right? Because what you just mentioned, it's an income piece. I'm working full time, but I'm not making a living wage, and that living wage even can't pay the rent. So therefore, I'm here. Don't want to be here. I don't have another option of actual affordable housing. So I'm in this 24/7 spot, taking up a space that could actually be used for someone who truly needs that wraparound kind of support.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that there's and what we've seen, and so we've been on the road this year too. So I just got back off like 3 weeks of the past 6 weeks in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and Regina, and we're seeing the same things. So rents continue to go higher. Income is pretty stagnant, and food is more expensive. So food security is getting worse. The housing's kind of about the same or getting worse. Homelessness is on the rise, and income isn't doing it what it has in the past. So employment without a living wage won't work. So there's the income floor I think that combines the idea of wage support and additional support for those that have a higher propensity for poverty or are more marginalized. So I think that there's some of that to figure out, and I don't know. I think we're trying hard, but I think we're a lot of times working against business that's taking a lot of that money out of the economy, and not injecting it in places that need it and for people that need it. But we could make work pay better, and I think that's been a piece, kind of a piece that's always stuck me about the recession, or no, sorry, against a pandemic, is that people saying that people don't want to work anymore. And I think the part of it is people don't want to work anymore, for crappy wages in dangerous places. And I think that's what they don't finish saying that whole sentence, because it's not worth it. Because getting sick is a for sure way into poverty, and working. And so we're putting a lot of people out to do these jobs we need done, that the society or the economy needs done, but we're not paying them fairly, and we're not taking care of them while they're out there.
Yeah, and God forbid you'd have to go on disability. It's a life sentence into poverty right away. You're right, and the reform that we're talking about in Ontario right now, because social assistance is a reform. There's no mention of really. It's not reform. Do we look at increasing it? It's really how it's processed. It's all about process going forward. Well, listen, this report is. I mean, everyone should read the report. Go through it, build a plan around it. What is the response been so far when you released it? How have people been responding to it?
Yeah, really positive. I think that the people have enjoyed the tone of the report, if that makes any sense, where it's positive and action oriented. And I think we've got quite a good response from the report. I think the recommendations are able to be applied at a provincial or municipal level, or a community level. So it's not really. I think that they're, involve the people that are, going to experience your program in the program development, make sure it's equitable, pay people, support people in a way that they're above the poverty line, look after kids first, and make your programs and systems easy to access, and take all the barriers down, the red tape. So I think those are pretty easy things to enact in a community. So I think that we've done a pretty good job figuring out how to make the recommendations be meaningful all the way down and all the way up. And so we've got good response too from government. Our past 2 reports have been well received, and a lot of stuff has been put in place because of our report, or in alignment with our report. I'm not going to take any responsibility for why government does what they do. But I think that we've been able to provide, I would say one of the pieces of the council's work is to provide public cover for political courage. So I think that and we'll need more. We need more courage. We need more courageous action on poverty, because if we don't, then we're going to let this moment slip. where people actually care about each other and care for each other. And then we live in a Canada we don't want to live in. And that's not the Canada I envision where I live right now. So.
Very cool. The way I see it is this report is a telling narrative that is makes it next to impossible for government to ignore. You're saying again, this is what, to quote, I think it was your dad. You can tell the people what to do, not how to do. You can't do both, right? You're saying here's what's there. How you do that is up to you, but you got to do this and push it forward. So what's next for the report? What's next for the council? What are you working on?
Yeah, so we've been on the road, like I said, for 3 weeks in across the country: Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and Regina. It's been interesting. A lot more homelessness than I saw in 2020, like everywhere. Some interesting models, some really kind of individuals and organizations doing really good and hard work on the front lines to help individuals kind of help them find themselves out of poverty. But it's hard. Housing is expensive, food is expensive, inflation's going crazy. There's still people getting sick. So the pandemic, I think all the government said it was over, but people are still getting sick, and with the flu now. So there's other forces at play. There's a lot of stress, it seems. We've seen a lot of cases of hope, a lot of faith in our communities, in themselves. But we've also seen some people that have worked in the social workers and like longtime volunteers that are feeling pretty hopeless about the situation currently. And I think we need to figure out what to do about that. And that's one of the challenges. We talked to a young lady in Toronto, and she said one of the most kind of telling things about our whole tour so far was in a capitalist society, the poor are considered a problem to solve, not people to love. How do we change that narrative? How do we change that discussion? So the poor aren't a problem to solve. The poor, poverty is a social issue, a society issue. It needs a social solution. Even if we figured out monetary poverty, we have to figure out how to include and embrace and care for and care about all of us. Find the way to include everybody in our communities, in our cities, in our families, in our lives, and do better for each other. I think that's kind of the big message that I've heard across the country, and we can do better because there's examples of it every day, everywhere. We just don't do very well at organizing, kind of collectively to do it. So if we can figure out how to do it for one person, we should be able to figure out how to do it for everybody. But it's a lot of work. It's heavy lifting. It's a lot of sharing across and not doing by yourself. So maybe that's where I'll end it there.
Yeah, beautifully said. And thanks for helping to share some of those voices from across the country as you did this work. I mean, Scott, here's the reality too, is that when during the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of temporary housing spots were opened up and money was temporarily assigned, that ended, right? And we saw this in York region, we see it in Toronto. You can't shut down all these hotels. Now, granted, we've made some strides on housing, right? And so some of those, but not all those spots are matched up and they were full. So yes, it is not better. It is worse. We're seeing the numbers climb. It could grind on some people. Yes, this is very solvable. As you said, we know a lot of things that can be successful moving this forward. Even when we talk about that whole supply thing, we're talking about in Ontario, we need 150,000 new homes built. But what's missing too, among many things, and we've done a separate podcast on Bill 23, is also, hey man, we got crumbling infrastructure. So it's just not the new stuff. We're actually losing the old stuff at such a rapid rate that the new stuff, we're actually slipping behind. And Tim Richter said we have less housing now, affordable housing now than we did in 2015 because of that crumbling infrastructure, because of all the houses going to the private market and with rents going up, it's no longer affordable, right? So we've got some big challenges, but we have big solutions. And kudos to you and the team for this report, for the work they continue to do, for making the voices of those most in need heard through the work that you do. Where can people go if they want to check out this report?
So Canada.ca is, and if you can look up the National Advisory Council on Poverty, all 3 reports are there. Social media, it's also around. But yeah, if you look at the National Advisory Council on Poverty and look at reports, we're right there. I'll send a link in, and I'm not sure how you can share a link. I'm not familiar with this technology, but I can put a link somewhere, and people can click on it as well.
We will make sure they get it. Listen, you're a busy guy. You've been traveling. It is Friday right now. It's record this at the end of the day. I'm so grateful for all you and the council are doing for like I said, give it a voice to those who need their voices heard. Scott, thank you so much for what you do for joining us today. And you're always welcome back to talk about the great work you're doing on this podcast.
Thank you, Michael. I was sad I didn't get to see your blue beard, I got to tell you. But also, and thank you for the work you do and your organization does to help, around housing and homelessness in Ontario. It's important work. And the thing is that we have to figure out how we all do important work together because we are better together, and none of us can stop. We have to all keep going, and we're not going to it's not a handoff. It's just it's come along. We got to figure out this together. So keep up the great work yourself, and thanks for having me on.
Awesome, Scott. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Well, everybody, that was I could talk about this for hours, and in a lot of our podcasts, you'll see there's overlapping themes around income security, around food security. We know a lot of the challenges. We also know a lot of the solutions. It really is, as Scott said, coming together to share those, to have one common voice. The council does that, to give voice to people experiencing poverty. The numbers are dropping. This is encouraging. It's encouraging work. It has to go down. We should never be satisfied until no one has to experience poverty. And I think by 2030, we're seeing the signs that we can get there. So cool. A great guest, as always, on this podcast are brilliant people in Canada, around the world that are making strides in this work and giving us great hope. And I guarantee one thing, that we will have another amazing guest next week when we see you on the way home.